Hey guys, today we're going to be going through my top 3 tips for probability, especially if you find the topic particularly difficult. These are things which I've noticed a lot of students don't do, but if you did do these things, you would find your life to be a lot easier. Now the very first tip that I have for you guys is be careful that you pick up on verbal cues in the question, okay? Too many times, questions will oftentimes give you hints as per what type of distribution you're dealing with or what type of formula you might need to use. For example, a very common one that I see people miss out on. Anytime that they say something like, given that, that's usually a sign that you're dealing with conditional probability. But a lot of people miss out on those cues. Another example, for many binomial distribution questions, you'll oftentimes hear them say something like, each trial is independent of each other. So look out for those verbal patterns because oftentimes VCA is going to try and give you those cues to help you identify what formula you need to use. So make sure that you guys don't miss out on those things there. Now, my second tip for you guys when it comes to dealing with probability, especially if you're doing something like the binomial distribution or the normal distribution, is always go about defining the distribution. Too many times I see people just rush headfirst into binomial distribution or normal distribution questions. Make sure that you actually take that time to identify and define what is your n and p values if it's binomial, or what is your mean and standard deviation if it's a normal distribution question. Oftentimes, this is information that's given to you right at the very beginning of the question. You don't even have to read through part A or part B to get those things. It's given to you immediately in the stimulus. So if you guys find that you're either not able to identify those values or you're misidentifying them, just be careful that you define that distribution at the beginning of your question. And oftentimes the information is given to you immediately inside of the stem. Okay? So you don't have to actually read through part A or read through part B because that's where people start messing up your n and your p values. Just straight away read through the stimulus, look for a probability, that's usually going to be your p value, and look for the number of times you're doing something, which is your n value. For normal distributions, it's a lot more straightforward. They'll use the words like mean and standard deviation, but regardless, don't just jump straight away into using your CAS. Write those values down first so that you're very clear on what you're measuring. Now last but not least, a really big thing that I see people mess up on is your inequalities, okay? So things like more than or less than. Now, your inequalities matter depending on the type of probability you're dealing with. If you're dealing with discrete probability, it's really important that you get your inequalities correct. For example, if I have something like the probability that x is more than 5, so maybe I'm getting more than 5 heads when I do coin flips, that is not going to be the same thing as the probability as x is greater than or equal to 5. So if they use phrases like more than or less than, that is very different to using phrases like at least or at most, okay? So be very careful with your inequality signs if it's a discrete probability question. That is actually going to change up your numbers. In reality, what you would do is if its probability x is greater than 5, you'd actually move up to the next greatest number, which is probability x being greater than or equal to 6. Now once people understand that, the next confusing part which people realize is that for continuous, this doesn't matter at all. So this rule here only applies if it's discrete probability. If it's something which is continuous, however, so a normal distribution or just a regular function, what you'll realize is that the probability that x is greater than 5 is exactly the same as the probability that x is greater than or equal to 5. So notice that this difference with inequalities only applies if it's discrete. It doesn't matter if it's continuous probability. So for those of you guys who are going into year 12, make sure you understand those differences because a lot of people mess them up on questions. Hope these 3 hints help for you guys, and that can help you to avoid a lot of silly mistakes with probability. I'll catch you guys around in the next video.